What happens when the most important day of your marriage becomes just another Tuesday to the man who promised you forever? For Chloe Gallagher, it was her 10th wedding anniversary. For her husband Liam, a high-flying corporate shark, it was the night of the Sterling Whitcroft Gala, the night that would define his career. He walked out the door that morning without a single glance back, his mind filled with stock prices and promotions, leaving Chloe in a silence that was heavier than any argument. But what he didn't know was that this was the last day he would ever see his wife as the woman who waited for him. By the end of the night, she would make an entrance that would not only make him remember their anniversary, but would also bring his entire world crashing down around him in front of everyone who mattered. The sun hadn't yet broken through the morning haze over the city, but the light in Liam Gallagher's eyes was already blazing. It was the fierce, predatory glint of a man who saw his prize dangling just within reach. Today was the day. The Sterling Whitcroft Annual Legacy Gala. It wasn't just a party, it was a coronation. The senior vice president position for the North American division was open, and the entire corporate world knew the race was down to two men, him and Marcus Thorne. Liam knotted his silk tie a deep charcoal gray that matched his custom-tailored suit. His reflection in the sprawling bedroom mirror was the picture of success. Sharp jawline, meticulously styled dark hair, and eyes that held the cold calculus of 1,000 closed deals. He adjusted his cufflinks, tiny silver things in the shape of bulls, a gift from a client after a particularly ruthless market takeover. Everything about him screamed ambition. "You're up early," a soft voice said from the bed. Chloe was propped up on one elbow, her honey blonde hair a messy halo around her face, the warm rumpled sheets pooled around her waist. To any other man she would have been a vision, the kind of gentle beauty that calms the storms of a hectic life. To Liam in that moment, her voice was just background noise, a gentle hum against the roaring symphony of his own goals. "Big day, sweetheart," he said, his eyes still fixed on his own reflection. "The gala is tonight. Everything has to be perfect." Chloe's smile was small, a little fragile. "I know. You've been talking about it for months." She paused, and a hopeful light flickered in her blue eyes. "Do you know what else is today?" Liam finally turned, grabbing his platinum watch from the nightstand. He strapped it to his wrist with practiced efficiency. "What's that? Is it the landscaper coming? I told them Tuesday wasn't good." The flicker in her eyes died. No, not the landscaper. He was already moving toward the closet, pulling out his briefcase. His mind was a flurry of checklists: review the quarterly reports, have a pre-gala prep call with his team, make sure his speech was memorized. Not that he'd need it. He was a master of improvisation. "Well, whatever it is, can you handle it?" he asked, his voice distracted. He kissed the air in her general direction. "I've got back-to-back meetings until 5, then I'm heading straight to the venue. Don't wait up." He was at the bedroom door when she spoke again, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. 10 years, Liam." He stopped his hand on the doorknob. For a split second, a flicker of something, a memory, a feeling tried to pierce the armor of his ambition. 10 years. The number sounded significant, but his brain, so finely tuned to profits and losses, couldn't place it in any relevant context. He mentally scanned his portfolio, his major career milestones. Nothing. It must be something of hers. 10 years is a long time, he said, offering a generic placating smile over his shoulder. "We should do something for it. Maybe a trip next month after this SVP craziness dies down. You pick the place. Maldives, Bora, whatever you want." He didn't wait for an answer. He closed the door behind him, the soft click echoing in the suddenly cavernous bedroom. Chloe sank back against the pillows, the warmth of the bed offering no comfort against the cold that was seeping into her bones. He hadn't just forgotten. He hadn't even registered the clue. 10 years, their 10th wedding anniversary. She looked at the small, elegantly wrapped box on her nightstand. Inside was a vintage Patek Philippe watch, a model from the year they had met. She had spent months tracking it down, a perfect timeless gift for a man obsessed with time, a man who never seemed to have enough of it for her. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over Liam's contact photo, a picture from years ago on a beach in Greece before Sterling Whitcroft had consumed him whole. He was smiling a real unguarded smile, and his arm was wrapped tightly around her. They looked happy. They were happy. A tear slid down her cheek and dripped onto the screen, distorting his face. He hadn't always been this way. When they met, he was a brilliant, hungry junior analyst with dreams that felt big enough for both of them. She, a quiet art history major with a trust fund she rarely mentioned, had been captivated by his fire. She had believed in him, supported him, hosted dinners for his bosses, and celebrated his every minor victory as if it were her own. She had willingly stepped into the background, becoming the perfect corporate wife, the silent, elegant partner who made his hectic life run smoothly. But somewhere along the way, her support had become an expectation. Her presence had become furniture. She had become invisible. Another notification pinged on her phone. It was an email with the subject line Gala Itinerary, Final. She wasn't an official employee of Sterling Whitcroft, but as Liam's wife, she was on the mailing list for major events. She opened it, her eyes scanning the schedule. 7:00 p.m., cocktail hour. 8:00 p.m., dinner and opening remarks by CEO, Mr. Alistair Sterling. 9:30 p.m., keynote address and executive announcements. That was it, the moment Liam had mortgaged their life for. She closed the email and opened another app on her phone, a secure encrypted messaging service. She typed a short message to a contact named Isabella. He forgot. The plan is a go. Confirm asset transfer for 8:45 p.m. A reply came back almost instantly. Confirmed. Are you sure about this, Chloe? There's no going back. Chloe looked around the opulent bedroom at the life she had helped build, a beautiful cage she hadn't even realized she was in. She looked at the gift on her nightstand, a symbol of a love he no longer had time to acknowledge. She typed her final reply, her fingers steady, her heart no longer breaking but hardening into something new, something resolute. I'm not going back. I'm going forward. She got out of bed, leaving the forgotten gift and the rumpled sheets behind her. She walked to her own closet, a massive walk-in that Liam rarely entered. She pushed past the racks of elegant, understated dresses he liked her to wear, the beige, the navy, the soft pastels of a supportive wife. At the very back, behind a false panel, was another wardrobe. It was filled with clothes that crackled with power, sharp structured suits, bold colors, and one dress in particular. A floor-length gown of liquid silver, a color that wasn't meant to blend in. It was a color meant to catch the light, to command attention, to announce an arrival. Today was their 10th anniversary, and Liam was right. It was a big day, just not for the reasons he thought. The grand ballroom of the Astoria Hotel was a cathedral of capitalism. Soaring ceilings dripped with crystal chandeliers that cast a golden, forgiving light over the assembled titans of industry. The air was thick with the scent of money, a heady mix of expensive perfume, aged scotch, and palpable ambition. This was Liam Gallagher's element. He moved through the crowd not like a guest, but like a conquering general surveying his domain. Liam, brilliant to see you, said a portly banking executive, clapping him on the back. That Q4 projection you put together was a masterpiece. All about staying ahead of the curve. David, Liam replied with a practiced, confident smile. You know how it is. He exuded an effortless charm that masked a relentless, calculating mind. He shook hands, remembered names, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and subtly steered every conversation towards his recent successes. He was planting seeds, reinforcing his own legend in the minds of the men who held the keys to the kingdom. His eyes scanned the room for his target, and he found him holding court near the cascading champagne fountain. Marcus Thorne. He was Liam's opposite in almost every way. Where Liam was sleek and modern, Marcus was old money and tradition, with a signet ring on his pinky and an air of entitlement that came from a lifetime of never being told no. He was smooth, politically savvy, and utterly ruthless. Liam made his way over, a fresh glass of champagne in his hand. "Marcus," he said, his voice a low, friendly challenge. Enjoying the party, Marcus turned, a slow, reptilian smile spreading across his face. "Gallagher." "I am. It's always amusing to watch the junior leagues fight for scraps. I trust you've polished your acceptance speech." The barb was meant to sting, to imply the race was already over. Liam just chuckled. "I always come prepared, but I find the best victories are the ones that are unexpected. Keeps things interesting, don't you think?" "Oh, I agree," Marcus said, taking a deliberate sip of his drink. "Like the unexpected collapse of a rival's signature project. I heard there were some hiccups with the Singapore acquisition you managed." Liam's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Singapore deal had been a brutal, complex negotiation that had consumed his life for 6 months. There had been a last-minute complication, a phantom investor who drove up the price, but he had still closed it, still delivered a win. "We closed it, Marcus, and it's already outperforming projections." Liam shot back, his voice smooth as ice. "Some people see hiccups. I see opportunities to demonstrate resilience under pressure. The board tends to appreciate that." Their verbal sparring was cut short by the arrival of a figure who silenced the entire area around them. Mr. Alistair Sterling. He was the CEO, a man in his late 60s with piercing gray eyes and a quiet authority that required no theatrics. He was the final boss, the man whose opinion was the only one that truly mattered tonight. "Liam," Marcus, Mr. Sterling said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Good to see you both looking sharp. It's a big night for the company." "Indeed, sir," Marcus said instantly, becoming the deferential subordinate. "A testament to your leadership." Liam opted for a more direct approach. "We're all eager to hear the announcement, sir. The future of Sterling Whitcroft is bright." Mr. Sterling gave a non-committal nod, his gaze lingering on Liam for a moment longer than it did on Marcus. "The future is always shaped by those with the boldest vision and the deepest commitment." His eyes held a strange, almost analytical weight. "Speaking of commitment, Liam, I don't believe I've seen your lovely wife this evening. Is Chloe not joining us?" The question was casual, polite, but for Liam it was like a bug in his perfectly running code. Chloe. Right. The gala. He had been so focused on his own performance that he'd forgotten about her role as a prop. "She's running a bit late," Liam improvised smoothly. "She had a charity board meeting this afternoon. You know, Chloe always dedicated to her causes. She'll be here." He hoped he sounded convincing. In truth, he hadn't spoken to her since his dismissive departure that morning. He assumed she would just show up as she always did, dressed elegantly, smiling placidly, a perfect silent testament to his stable home life. Marcus saw the briefest flicker of uncertainty and seized it. "Ah, yes, the ever-graceful Chloe," he purred, a predatory glint in his eye. "A woman of such class. It must be difficult being married to a man as driven as Liam. I imagine it takes a special kind of patience, especially on important days. Anniversaries, birthdays. They must all take a back seat to the quarterly reports." The word hung in the air, a landmine Liam hadn't seen. Anniversaries. It was as if a switch had been flipped in the back of his mind. The quiet words from his wife that morning, which he had dismissed as background noise, suddenly came crashing into his consciousness with the force of a tidal wave. 10 years, Liam. The champagne glass felt slick in his suddenly sweaty palm. The golden light of the ballroom seemed to dim the cheerful buzz of the crowd, fading into a dull roar. 10 years. Their 10th anniversary. Today. He had walked out that morning without a word. He had been here for hours, basking in the glow of his own ego while she was at home alone on their 10th wedding anniversary. A cold dread, colder and more terrifying than any market crash, washed over him. He looked at Mr. Sterling, whose expression was unreadable, and at Marcus, whose smirk was a clear sign of victory. Marcus knew. He had somehow known, and he had deployed the information with surgical precision. Not to attack Liam's business acumen, but to attack his character in front of the one man who mattered most. Commitment. Mr. Sterling repeated softly, his gaze now boring into Liam. It's about remembering what's truly important. Liam opened his mouth to say something to salvage the situation, but no words came. His mind, usually a supercomputer of excuses and deflections, was blank. He had been so focused on winning the battle that he hadn't realized he had already lost the war that truly mattered. The senior vice president title suddenly felt like a hollow, meaningless prize he had forgotten. And in a room full of people he wanted to impress, his rival had just made sure that his ultimate failure as a man, as a husband, was laid bare for all to see. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Mr. Sterling gave Liam a final lingering look, not of anger, but of something far worse, disappointment. He then turned his attention fully to Marcus, engaging him in a quiet conversation about a new European expansion, effectively dismissing Liam as if he were a junior intern who had spilled coffee on the carpet. The invisible wall that went up between them was as solid and impenetrable as reinforced concrete. Liam stood there frozen, the ghost of his confident smile still plastered on his face while his insides churned with a toxic mix of panic and shame. The small circle of executives who had been orbiting him moments before, drawn to his gravitational pull of success, now seemed to drift away, finding sudden urgent interest in other conversations across the room. He was radioactive. Marcus, ever the opportunist, twisted the knife. "Don't beat yourself up, Gallagher," he said, his voice low and dripping with false sympathy, loud enough only for Liam to hear. "It's an easy mistake to make when you're a titan of industry. The little people and their little dates on the calendar, they just slip through the cracks. I'm sure Chloe is used to it by now." Every word was a perfectly aimed blow. Liam wanted to lash out to wipe the smug, condescending smirk off Marcus's face, but he was paralyzed. He had no defense. The accusation was true, and the truth had stripped him of all his corporate armor. He excused himself, mumbling something about a phone call, and retreated toward the ornate French doors that led to a deserted marble balcony. The cool night air was a shock to his system, but it did little to quell the fire of humiliation burning in his gut. He leaned against the balustrade, loosening the tie that suddenly felt like a noose, and stared out at the glittering, indifferent city skyline. How could he have been so stupid? So blind? He replayed the morning in his head. Chloe's hopeful question. His dismissive answer about the landscaper. Her quiet, heartbreaking statement. 10 years, Liam. It was all there. The breadcrumbs were laid, and he had stomped over them in his expensive shoes without a second glance. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling as he scrolled to her name. He hit call, his heart pounding a desperate rhythm against his ribs. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Chloe. I can't come to the phone right now. Please leave a message." Her voice, usually a source of calm, now sounded like a judgment. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. She was screening his calls. Of course she was. What did he expect? A new wave of panic, more personal and profound than any professional setback, washed over him. This wasn't about the promotion anymore. This was about Chloe. He thought of the last 10 years not as a timeline of his career, but as a mosaic of their life together. Her patiently listening to him rehearse presentations late into the night. Her planning surprise birthday parties he was often too tired to fully enjoy. Her creating a beautiful, peaceful home that served as his sanctuary from the brutal world he fought in every day. A sanctuary he had taken for granted, like the air he breathed. He had treated her like a subsidiary of his own life, a well-managed asset that required minimal oversight. And now he was facing the consequences of a catastrophic emotional bankruptcy. He sent a frantic text. "Chloe, I am so sorry. I'm an idiot. I just remembered. Please call me. I can leave now. We can do something. Please." The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared, and his heart leaped with a sliver of hope. Then they vanished. No reply. The digital silence was her answer. It was more damning than any angry tirade. He was spiraling, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. He had built his identity on being the man who was always in control, the man who saw every angle, who anticipated every move. But he had missed the most important move of all, right in his own home. He had failed. Not as a businessman, but as a husband. A polite cough pulled him from his self-flagellation. It was Mr. Sterling's executive assistant, a prim woman named Patricia. Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Sterling is about to begin his opening remarks. He requests that all senior staff be seated at the head tables. It was an order. He had to go back in there. He had to face them all, the whispers, the pitying looks, the triumphant stare of Marcus Thorne. He had to sit there and pretend that his entire life wasn't imploding in real time. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his tie and forced a mask of composure onto his face. He walked back into the ballroom, the golden light now seeming harsh and accusatory. He took his seat at the front table next to an empty chair with a place card that read, Mrs. Chloe Gallagher. The empty space was a gaping wound, a public monument to his failure. Marcus was at the same table a few seats down, and he offered Liam a small pitying nod that was more insulting than any slur. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Mr. Alistair Sterling walked to the podium, the crowd falling into a reverent silence. "Welcome," Mr. Sterling began, his voice echoing through the vast hall. "Welcome to a night where we celebrate not just our successes, but the very foundation upon which Sterling Whitcroft is built. Dedication, vision, and unwavering partnership." Liam stared at the empty chair beside him. Unwavering partnership. The irony was so thick he felt like he was choking on it. He was a fraud, and in the most important room of his professional life, everyone was about to find out. The humiliation was just beginning. Mr. Sterling continued his speech, his words a distant drone in Liam's ears. He spoke of market leadership and fourth-quarter triumphs. But Liam's world had shrunk to the agonizing space of the empty chair beside him. Every time a waiter passed or the ballroom doors opened, his head would snap up in a desperate, foolish hope that Chloe would walk in, offer a quiet apology for being late, and slip into her seat, erasing this public nightmare. But the chair remained empty. And as we look to the future, Mr. Sterling was saying, reaching a crescendo, we know that our greatest asset is not in our balance sheets, but in the bold new talents that will steer this company into the next decade. This was it. The preamble to the announcement. Liam felt a fresh wave of nausea. He had wanted this moment more than anything. Now he wished the floor would swallow him whole. He could feel Marcus's eyes on him, radiating smug confidence. Marcus had played his hand perfectly. He hadn't just outmaneuvered Liam. He had exposed him as fundamentally flawed, a man whose personal foundation was rotten. Mr. Sterling paused, taking a sip of water and letting the anticipation in the room build to an almost unbearable level. But before we get to our executive appointments for the coming year, there is another significant development I wish to share. One that represents not just a change in leadership, but a fundamental evolution of our company's ownership and direction. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't on the program. Liam frowned, his analyst's brain kicking in despite his personal turmoil. Ownership change. He hadn't heard a single whisper about a merger or a major buyout. Sterling Whitcroft was a privately held behemoth, fiercely protective of its independence. At that exact moment, the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. They didn't just open. They were pushed wide with a silent, deliberate force that commanded attention. All conversation ceased. Every head in the room, including Mr. Sterling's on stage, turned to face the entrance. A collective gasp went through the hall. Framed in the doorway was a woman. But she wasn't just a woman. She was an event. She wore a floor-length gown of liquid silver that shimmered and flowed like molten metal under the chandeliers. It was a dress designed not for demure attendance, but for a grand arrival. Her honey-blonde hair, which Liam was used to seeing in a simple, elegant chignon, was styled in sleek, powerful waves that fell over one shoulder. Her makeup was bold, her expression serene and unreadable, and around her neck was a diamond necklace so brilliant it seemed to suck all the light in the room towards it. It took Liam's brain a full 3 seconds to process the impossible sight before him. It was Chloe. But it wasn't the Chloe he knew. This was not the quiet, supportive wife who organized his sock drawer and preferred gardening to galas. This woman radiated a confidence so potent it was almost an aura. She didn't look flustered or late. She looked like she had arrived at precisely the moment she intended to. She paused at the doorway, her gaze sweeping across the sea of stunned faces, her eyes cool and assessing. She wasn't looking for her seat. She wasn't looking for him. She was taking measure of the room, of its power, and finding it wanting. Then she began to walk. Her pace was unhurried, her silver heels clicking softly on the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by that soft, steady sound. It was as if a queen were walking through her court. People didn't just look. They stared, mesmerized and bewildered. She wasn't walking towards their table at the front. She was walking towards the stage. Liam was paralyzed, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. Who was this woman? What was happening? He felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him, the question hanging in the air. Is that your wife? He saw Marcus Thorne's jaw slacken, his smug expression replaced by one of utter disbelief. As Chloe reached the foot of the stage, she didn't stop. She gracefully ascended the small set of stairs as if she owned it. She walked directly to the podium, stopping beside a visibly unsurprised Mr. Sterling, who stepped back slightly to make room for her, a gesture of deference that sent another shockwave through the crowd. She stood at the podium, looking out at the stunned audience. Her eyes finally found Liam's. For a fleeting second, he saw a flicker of the woman he knew, a hint of the 10 years they had shared, a shadow of the pain he had caused her that morning. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by an impenetrable, steely resolve. Then Mr. Sterling leaned into the microphone, his voice filled with a new, undisguised pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming in the silent hall, "allow me to introduce you to the strategic mind behind our recent unprecedented acquisition of the Etheria Group and the new majority shareholder of Sterling Whitcroft Enterprises." He paused, gesturing to the magnificent woman in silver beside him. "My niece and your new executive chairwoman, Ms. Chloe Sterling." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Chloe Sterling, not Chloe Gallagher. Sterling. Liam felt the blood drain from his face. The air in his lungs seemed to evaporate. It was as if the world had suddenly tilted, throwing him into a dimension where nothing made sense. Sterling. As in Alistair Sterling. As in the name emblazoned on the building he worked in, on the letterhead of the documents he signed, on the very fabric of the life he had so desperately coveted. The ballroom erupted, not into applause, but into a chaotic cacophony of frantic whispers. People were leaning across tables, their faces masks of shock and confusion. Who his niece? Since when? How the questions echoed Liam's own internal screaming. He looked from Chloe. No Chloe Sterling standing at the podium, bathed in the spotlight like a celestial being, to Alistair Sterling, who was now beaming at her with an expression of pure familial pride. It all clicked into place with horrifying, devastating clarity. The puzzle pieces of his life, which he thought he had arranged so perfectly, reassembled themselves into a picture he didn't recognize, a picture in which he was not the star, but a footnote. Her quiet nature, which he had mistaken for meekness, was actually discretion. Her disinterest in corporate gossip, which he had seen as naivety, was the silence of someone who already knew all the secrets. Her family money, the trust fund she never touched, and rarely spoke of, the one he had always dismissed as a quaint inheritance from some distant unknown relative. It wasn't from some relative. It was from the relatives. The Sterlings. He had been married to the heiress of the Sterling Whitcroft fortune for 10 years, and he had never known. His mind flashed back through a decade of memories, now recontextualized and tainted by this new world-shattering truth. Her subtle deflections whenever he asked about her family. Her insistence on a small private wedding. The way Alistair Sterling had always treated him with a certain curiosity, and analytical gaze that Liam had interpreted as professional assessment. He wasn't being vetted for a job. He was being observed as his niece's husband. On stage, Chloe stepped forward to the microphone. The whispers died instantly, replaced by a charged, expectant silence. "Thank you, Uncle Alistair," she said. Her voice was different. It was the same melodic tone, but it was imbued with a new weight, a resonance of power that he had never heard before. It was a voice that didn't request attention but commanded it. For a long time she began, her eyes sweeping across the room but pointedly avoiding Liam. "I have preferred to contribute to this company from behind the scenes. I believe that true strength doesn't require an audience. But circumstances change. New leadership is required for a new era." Her gaze finally deliberately settled on Marcus Thorne. An era that will prioritize integrity, loyalty, and a clear-eyed vision for the future. She said the word loyalty with a chilling emphasis. Marcus, who had been gaping like a fish, seemed to shrink in his seat. Then her eyes moved to Liam. The coldness in them was a physical force, a glacier moving through the ballroom and stopping at his heart. "My first act as executive chairwoman," she continued, her voice ringing with authority, "will be to personally oversee the next phase of our global expansion, starting with the Singapore acquisition." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "I reviewed the transaction files this afternoon. While the deal was eventually closed, it was done so at a 15% premium due to a failure to properly identify and negotiate with a key silent partner who was driving up the price." Liam felt his professional blood run cold. She was talking about his deal, his signature achievement. "That silent partner," Chloe announced to the breathless room, "was me. I was testing our team's due diligence, testing their ability to see beyond the obvious, to understand the true power dynamics in a negotiation. The test revealed certain deficiencies. It was a public execution." In a few masterfully delivered sentences, she had not only announced her arrival, but had also dismantled his biggest career win, reframing it as a failure of vision in front of the entire industry. She had used his own ambition as the weapon to destroy him. He wasn't a shark. He was a minnow she had been toying with all along. The empty chair beside him was no longer just a symbol of his forgetfulness. It was a symbol of his utter and complete blindness. He hadn't just forgotten his wife. He had failed to see her at all. The senior vice president position for North America will, for now, remain open. Chloe Sterling declared, her eyes still locked on his. "We are reevaluating the kind of leadership we need. We require a partner who understands that the greatest assets are not the ones you can list on a spreadsheet. They are the ones you value, the ones you cultivate, and the ones you never ever take for granted." Every word was a perfectly sharpened dagger aimed directly at his heart. He had forgotten their anniversary, and in response, she had calmly and systematically taken away everything he valued more than her: his career, his reputation, his future. The room finally broke into thunderous applause, a mixture of shock, admiration for the sheer audacity of her move, and the sycophantic need to curry favor with the new queen. Liam didn't hear it. The only sound in his ears was the shattering of his own name, his own identity. He was no longer Liam Gallagher, the rising star. He was just the fool who forgot his anniversary, the husband who was the last to know he was married to Chloe Sterling. Liam didn't remember leaving the gala. The rest of the evening was a blur of stunned faces, forced congratulations directed at the stage, and the suffocating feeling of being the primary subject of 100 hushed conversations. He somehow navigated his way out a ghost in a bespoke suit and took a taxi back to the penthouse that no longer felt like his. He was standing in the center of the vast, silent living room, the city lights twinkling below like a mocking audience, when he heard the soft click of the front door. Chloe entered. She had changed out of the silver gown and was now in a simple but impeccably tailored black dress. She looked less like a goddess and more like what she was, a formidable executive who had just completed a hostile takeover. She placed a sleek leather briefcase on the marble console table and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched thick with unspoken accusations and a decade of miscommunication. It was Liam who finally broke it, his voice raspy and hollow. "Sterling," he whispered. It was the only word he could manage. "It was my mother's name," she replied, her voice calm, devoid of the emotion he had expected. "I kept it professionally." "You never asked." The simplicity of her answer was more cutting than any scream. "You never asked." It was true. In his self-absorption, he had consumed the details of her life she offered, but had never bothered to dig any deeper. He'd accepted her as she presented herself because it was convenient. "Why Chloe?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why all of this, the public humiliation, the destruction of my career? Was it all just because I forgot our anniversary?" He was pleading, desperate for this to be a simple, albeit extreme act of revenge. A humorless, sad smile touched her lips. "You think this is about one day? You think my life's work taking control of my family's legacy was a plan I cooked up this morning because you didn't buy me flowers?" She shook her head, a gesture of profound disappointment. "Liam, this has been in motion for 2 years. The Etheria Group acquisition, the consolidation of shareholder votes, all of it. This was my plan to step out from my uncle's shadow and take my rightful place." She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city. The gala tonight. That was just a confluence of events. The timing was a tragic, poetic coincidence. Her gaze met his in the reflection of the glass. "But you're forgetting." That wasn't a coincidence. It was a symptom. The final symptom of a disease that has been killing our marriage for years. You haven't really seen me in a very long time. I became a part of the scenery and the life you were building for yourself. The raw, unvarnished truth of her words hit him harder than the public exposé. She wasn't an avenging angel. She was a woman who had simply stopped waiting for him to notice her and had started building a life of her own. "The Singapore deal," he stammered. "You were the silent partner. You were bidding against me." "I wasn't bidding against you," she corrected him gently. "I was bidding against Sterling Whitcroft's team, which you happened to lead. I needed to know how sharp our people were. I needed to see if they could identify a player who wasn't on their radar. You saw a faceless entity driving up the price. You never once considered the who or the why. You just saw a problem to be solved with more money. That told me everything I needed to know about the current leadership's vision. It's aggressive, but it's not insightful." He sank onto the edge of a pristine white sofa, his head in his hands. He had prided himself on his insight, his ability to read a room, a deal, a person. He had been living with the most important variable in his entire world and had never even thought to analyze her. "So what now?" he asked, his voice muffled. "Do you want a divorce?" Chloe was silent for a long moment. She walked over and sat in the armchair opposite him, a chasm of expensive carpet between them. "What I wanted for 10 years was a partner," she said, her voice softening for the first time, laced with a decade of sorrow. "I wanted the man I married, the one who would listen to my dreams with the same intensity he listened to market reports, the one whose eyes would light up when I walked into a room, not just when a deal closed." She leaned forward, her gaze locking with his. "The man I married is gone, Liam. He got lost somewhere on the way up the corporate ladder. What's left is a very successful, very ambitious man I don't really know, and who certainly doesn't know me." Tears welled in his eyes, hot, shameful tears. "I can change, Chloe. I swear. This is the wake-up call of all time. I see it now. I see you. Please. Don't leave me." "It's not about leaving you," she said, and her next words were the final verdict. "It's about me no longer being willing to be left behind. I am the executive chairwoman of this company now. My life is about to become exponentially more demanding than yours ever was. The question isn't whether I want a divorce. The question is, what are you going to do? Can you be the supportive spouse? Can you handle being Mr. Sterling? Can you sit at the galas and smile proudly from the audience while your wife is on stage? Can you be the partner to me that you expected me to be for you? He had no answer. The role she described was a complete inversion of his entire identity. To be the one in the background, the one who supports the one whose career comes second. It was anathema to everything he was. I don't know. He admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I know, she said, standing up. That's why this is so hard. She walked towards the bedroom, pausing at the doorway. Happy anniversary, Liam. You wanted to give me the world. It turns out I already owned it. I just wanted you to be in it with me. She disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. The click was quiet, but for Liam, it sounded like the final deafening slam of a vault, locking away a life he had never truly appreciated and could now never get back. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in humility for Liam. The world he had inhabited with such arrogant confidence was gone. At the office, he was a pariah. Colleagues who had once vied for his attention now avoided eye contact. He was the butt of whispers, the cautionary tale of the man who flew too close to the sun without realizing his wife owned it. He hadn't been fired. Chloe was too strategic for such a messy public move, but he was sidelined. His projects were reassigned. His opinions were no longer sought in high-level meetings. He was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost haunting the halls of his own ambition. Marcus Thorne was gone. Chloe had accepted his resignation a day after the gala, citing a divergence in long-term strategic vision. It was a bloodless corporate execution that served as a clear message to everyone else. Loyalty was the new currency at Sterling Whitcroft. At home, the dynamic was even more jarring. The penthouse, once his castle, was now Chloe's headquarters. It was filled with new energy. Assistants came and went, secure documents were couriered to the door, and hushed important phone calls in different languages echoed from her home office. She was a whirlwind of decisive action, a natural leader stepping into the role she was born for. And Liam was just there. He tried to follow through on his promise to change. He started coming home early, but she was often still on calls. He tried to cook dinner, but she would often have to eat at her desk while reviewing a merger proposal. He would ask about her day, and she would give him brief, efficient summaries of complex financial dealings that he only partially understood. He was trying to be the supportive husband, but he was clumsy and inept at it. He was playing a role he hadn't auditioned for, and he didn't know any of the lines. The true turning point came one Tuesday night, nearly a month after the gala. He found Chloe asleep on the sofa in her office, her laptop still balanced on her lap, a pen loose in her hand. A half-empty coffee cup sat on the table beside her. The fierce executive chairwoman was gone, and in her place was just his wife, exhausted and vulnerable. The sight pierced through his fog of self-pity. He gently took the laptop from her, closed it, and placed it on the desk. He then carefully lifted her into his arms. She stirred, murmuring something incoherent, and her head rested instinctively in the crook of his neck, a familiar gesture from a life that felt 1,000,000 years ago. She was lighter than he remembered. He carried her to their bedroom and gently laid her on the bed, taking off her shoes and pulling the covers over her. He didn't join her. Instead, he went back to her office and sat in her chair. On the screen, she had left open an analysis of a struggling green energy startup. It was a risky but potentially revolutionary investment. He started reading through the data, the prospectus, the market analysis. His old instincts, the skills that had made him a star at Sterling Whitcroft, kicked in. He saw the flaws in their business model, but he also saw the immense overlooked potential. For the next 3 hours he worked. He didn't do it for a promotion or for glory. He did it for her. He ran new numbers, drafted a list of strategic recommendations, and outlined a 3-point plan to mitigate the risks while maximizing the potential rewards. He saved the document as Liam's notes on her desktop and left the room, leaving her to sleep. The next morning she came into the kitchen where he was making coffee. She held her tablet in her hand, his document open on the screen. She looked at him, and for the first time in a month the mask of the chairwoman was gone. He saw a flicker of surprise, of curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite name. "You did this?" she asked, her voice quiet. He just nodded, bracing for criticism. "Your analysis is better than the one my team prepared," she said, her tone one of genuine, grudging respect. "You saw the structural weakness in their distribution model. Why didn't they?" "Because they were looking at it as a safe investment," Liam said, finding his voice. "I looked at it as a reclamation project. You don't buy it to sustain it, you buy it to rebuild it. That's where the real value is." A long silence settled between them. She continued to look at him, her gaze analytical but no longer cold. He wasn't the failed husband or the disgraced executive. In that moment, he was a brilliant strategist, a mind equal to her own. "I'm presenting this to the board tomorrow," she said. "I want you in the meeting." He was stunned. "As what?" "As my strategic advisor," she said simply, "and as my husband." It wasn't a magical fix. It wasn't a return to the way things were. That life was gone forever. But it was a beginning, a new one. Their marriage would not be rebuilt on the old flawed foundation of a man's ambition and a woman's silent support. It would be a new structure, a partnership of two powerful, intelligent people learning to navigate a world where they stood side by side as equals. Liam's future was no longer about climbing a ladder. It was about building a new one together with the woman he had almost lost. He had forgotten one anniversary, and in doing so had been given the terrifying, painful, and ultimately priceless gift of a chance to be present for every day that followed. The price of that lesson was his ego and his career as he knew it. The reward he was beginning to understand was everything, and so Liam's journey wasn't about winning back his job, but about earning back his place as a true partner. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest wake-up call isn't a gentle nudge, but a seismic shock that forces us to see what's been right in front of us all along. Their story wasn't a fairy tale ending, but the beginning of a real balanced partnership built from the ashes of a life taken for granted. What do you think he had to do next to truly prove himself? Could a marriage like that ever truly be the same again? We all have moments where we get lost in our own ambitions. The story of Liam and Chloe is a dramatic look at what happens when that focus makes us blind. If their incredible story of loss, revelation, and new beginnings moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story about power, love, and second chances. And most importantly, if you want more real-life dramas and gripping tales, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.